Hi everyone, welcome to the Q&A sessions with Meeta and Tosh. Hi Tosh, how are you doing?
Morning Meeta, how are you doing? All right?
Yeah, really good, thank you. Just looking forward to hopefully saying the word furlough for the last time ever.
Well, you know, it's good news and bad news, right? I mean, it's what happens next. That's what this is about. I mean, there hasn't actually been a lot in the news yet.
Well, it's an interesting one because, 18 months ago, everyone was up in arms. These new terms were out. You and I built these webinars on bringing real, up-to-date, first-hand information, which had never been considered or tested before. So we were kind of learning and advising as we went. And that's why we felt that even though furlough hasn't been a big cliffhanger, which is exactly what the government expected, there are going to be implications longer term. And I think it's important for us to talk to our audience and our network about, yes, there's nothing right now, but what could the longer term people impact be on your organization, your business, your success? Because even though people haven't fallen off the face, jobs haven't fallen off the face of the cliff, there's a lot of unrest out there.
I quite pride ourselves in having our finger on the pulse. And that normally means our clients are calling us about certain things. So certainly last year when we thought it was going to fall off the edge of the cliff, lots of calls, redundancies, how do we avoid these things? What do we do if furlough stops? And then they kept extending it, and then they kept extending it. So they kept getting ready for it, doing it, and then some of my clients even pulled it back, retracted all the redundancies and went back into it. But I've had none of that this time. I have to say, not a single call. It's business as usual. People are just dealing with whatever employment law issues that they're coming up with, grievances, disciplinaries, those sorts of things. So, I would like to know, everybody who's been here before knows what we do. We interact with you. This is an interactive live webinar. You've got two experts here looking to give you information that will overcome challenges you're facing right now. So if you are dealing with things that we're not seeing that much in the news or people are not calling us about at the moment, then let us know. But because it's so fresh, it was literally a week ago, it's come to an end, we thought this would be a very hot and relevant topic. So let us get you prepared regardless, so at least you know what needs to happen, I suppose, right?
Absolutely, because if it's not now, it may be in the future, because we still know that we've got these ups and downs, we've got the variants, we've got infection rates going up, we've got deaths going up. We're top 3 in the world for infections, so which is sad, but it's one of these things that as an I always talk about London being the heart of the world in terms of business and creativity and being innovative, and actually I think we've achieved that by always thinking about solutions. So it's fantastic that there hasn't been this cliff edge of people going off, but what is happening instead is that finding good people for organizations has become nigh on impossible to identify, because there's a lot of noise around applicants for jobs. And that's why, we're talking for about 30 to 40 minutes, as we always promised. If you've come with a question that you want answered specifically, put it to Tosh and I in the chat box or get in touch with us after. I think that is the real value. You've got free and, uncomplicated one-to-one access. So please use that. And if you're not comfortable doing it live, you can get in touch with us afterwards as well. We're always
touch with us offline. Our numbers, you would have our numbers, you would have got the emails about this in the first place. But just a couple of, I know you're normally the stats person, but I'm going to step in here now today. And then,
good, I love it. I prefer them to stats.
Last year in May, there were 9 million people on furlough.
Yeah.
This year in July, there were 1.6 million. I don't know the stats for after July. 1.6 million people still on furlough, and that's 360,000 less than it was the month before.
Yeah.
So people have been, they've been preparing for this, winding down, and there's still schemes available for the employees where the company's being made redundant, or where the company's gone insolvent. There's insolvency services so that employees can still get their redundancy pay, notice pay, holiday pay, all those things. So those are for the businesses that are closing down. So for any companies that are listening to this that are thinking, what do I do with them? Tell them to go to the insolvency service, or you can Google them. And there's lots of access to getting information, even when the company has no money. But that's not what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about things to do with redundancies and ways to avoid them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's why the poll that I put up today is very much around people in your world, because it may be that everyone's back into organizations. People have been on furlough, some for a few months, some for over a year. And it's not just about bringing those people back in, but are they now right for the roles? are you considering a restructure? And actually, at the moment, we've got a third of that have said, no, everything is fine. And then the rest, now 50%, the rest are saying that some are going to consider, a quarter are saying, yes, we'll consider, we're letting people go, and it might be a redundancy. And a quarter are saying, no, we're not letting them go, but we do have to coach, train and reskill. And that is the crux of this. Take nothing as granted. Don't assume that this person that's been off on furlough, no, you haven't made them redundant at this moment, but do they really understand your business now? Are you going to retain them in the right role for them and for you? So there's a lot under the skin of this end of September furlough scheme finishing, which will be impactful. So Tosh and I, we spoke, didn't we? As you said, redundancy, alternatives to redundancy, and then what I've just mentioned, what to consider when you're bringing your people back to work. You should take none of that for granted. And I've experienced that firsthand, so I definitely got some white hairs to show the experience and things to share, experiences.
Yeah, very, very current, very relevant. And certainly my clients are facing the same sorts of things. So I think we've both got a lot to offer here.
Yeah. So I'm just going to do a hello. I know we have a lot of regulars and hi to everyone, but I'm just posting a hello in the chat box for anyone who's new, just to show you it's really simple. You can just literally put a post there. You can make it private, so only Tosh and I see it. You can make it public, so everyone sees it. So be comfortable. So Tosh, I mean, as I said, this word furlough literally became our heartbeat for about 6 months when COVID started. Here we are hopefully having the last conversation around it. What would you say employers are feeling, thinking, and preparing for now with their staff in terms of the next stage?
I think the majority are dealing with the third topic, the one that you brought into play for today's webinar, Meeta, which is, what are we doing to get people back into work? How are we preparing those things? And employees are feeling a lot of power now, because employers might want them to come back into work, and there is clearly a benefit to come back into work, but people have got used to it. People got used to working from home. Employers might feel, well, are they working as effectively? I mean, but you need to, we should have adapted by now to look at outputs. We don't need to micromanage what they're doing every minute, as long as they're delivering, I suppose, is the better way of looking at it. So the main thing is, how do we do that hybrid? How do we make employers and employees happy? That seems to be the main thing, that balance.
Well, it's so interesting, because I think our whole point about this is, yes, furlough finished on the 30th of September, but the ripple effect of people being back at work, of businesses creaking under flexible working if not done right, or as you said, Tosh, still measuring it based on hours done rather than output, is going to start impacting. And I love to bring a current story in, but Facebook is a prime example. Facebook lost something. Mark Zuckerberg lost 8 billion of his own wealth, and Facebook's share prices dropped considerably because they had this record hours of outage, 5 or 6 hours, and they blamed it on people not being at work. Did you know that?
I did not know that.
Yeah. So they have now given a ultimatum to their staff around the world that by a certain date, and I've forgotten the certain date, but it's not very long, a few weeks or a month, that everyone has to be back at work for 50% of the time going forward. So they've committed to hybrid, but they've also said it has to be black and white that they're in for 50%. And it's interesting because this is one of the biggest companies in the world with massive influence. And, they've just literally, cost themselves a lot by not having the foresight or plans in place. So if they're struggling, what are organizations, SMEs, not-for-profit organizations without that skill and expertise going to suffer? So that's what I think today about is for us. No, there may not be redundancies or restructures today, but be prepared and ask yourself the questions, because things are going to ebb and flow, and not everyone is going to be along for the long-term journey with you.
I think, Meeta, one of the other things is that, people being at home as a result of COVID, they've reevaluated where they're spending their time. For ages, employers took the kind of stance that, you can't work from home, or it's better working in the office, or whatever it was, that flexibility wasn't there. Now, we did one on maternity recently about flexible working. Yeah. Look at these cases coming out of the woodwork. I mean, they've always been there, probably just being publicized more now. But people are really, work-life balance is not a new buzzword, but people are certainly prioritizing. And as we go into the next level of the labor market that's going to come in, they're really not going to stand for anything less than whatever suits that work-life balance. It's not
already happening.
Like our days of grafting.
No.
People don't want to work hard. They want to work smart. So you've got to kind of respect that.
Well, you do. But again, it's the thinking of organizations about having the right resource output rather than bums on seats. And we are doing, the majority, during lockdown, the majority of our work was advisory, training, coaching, some recruitment, but probably 10% of what we would normally do. We are now back up to 100% plus on attraction. And the biggest challenge, I even went out to dinner with a business owner, a friend, and she said the same thing. It's people are just saying, no, I don't want to do 5 days in the office. Yeah. And, this is an organization who are traditionally people in the office, and they said, we're not willing to change. And it's going to become a little bit like chicken, who's going to fold first, And we always say to employers that what's right for you has to be your priority, because you have the responsibility of running a successful organization. However, not having the right people in your world because you're feeling very rigid about the 9 to 5, 5 days a week, or 9 to 6, may put you at a disadvantage in terms of attracting talent. So
and with the legal liability as well, Meeta. I mean, there are legal obligations.
Let's talk about that, because that has been our biggest and most popular webinar since summer, since we've come back, has been around flexible requirements. And actually, furlough leads into people coming back and saying, I don't want to work 4 days, 5 days in the office. I want flexibility. Hence why employers will have to consider redundancies, alternatives to redundancy, and so on. So let's talk about that legal implication again. It may not be maternity. It may be people coming back from redundancy.
Yeah, I mean, the flexible working right, I'm sorry if I'm sounding like a stuck record for anybody that listened to our previous sessions, but the right is for any employee that's been with the company for at least 26 weeks, right? So if that flexible, and they were allowed to make a flexible working request one time a year, right? In writing, and an employer has a legal obligation to reasonably consider that request within 3 months. That's it. If they refuse, there's no right of appeal, any of those things, then the only recourse you would have will potentially be in an employment tribunal. Now, there's two scenarios, Meeta. The most obvious one is where there's a flexible working request due to childcare commitments or obligations, right?
Yeah.
So in those circumstances where it's not reasonably considered, it will amount to sex discrimination, because you're treating that person less favorably as a result of their request, which is obviously based on sex.
What about if it was a father applying for flexible working for childcare? Would that be seen as?
It can apply both ways, right? You can treat somebody less favorably on the grounds of sex, or because they're a woman, or because they're a man. The circumstances will be the circumstances. So in the case of looking after it for a child, typically that will be sex discrimination for a woman. In the case of it being a father, why would it not be the same circumstances?
It's just interesting, because 75% of returning to work mums ask for flexible, but only 25% of dads. But we know that maternity and paternity leave is very underutilized. But I feel that going forward with this remote working and just people I'm coaching about going back to work after maternity, they're really talking about equal share of childcare. So hopefully things are going to start evolving.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. They're talking about abolishing the 26-week requirement. So that's certainly something in there. So you get it immediately. And remember, it applies to anybody.
That's what you get.
Exactly right. You don't have to be. There's no eligibility criteria. It's got to be an employee, I suppose, is the only criteria.
Yeah.
And you can ask for any reason. It's not because of childcare. That's an old thing. Now it's because you blooming well feel like it. So that's the consequence. If that's just because you followed the flexible working process correctly, doesn't mean you're not open to a sex discrimination claim in that example.
Yeah.
So don't think you just tick boxes.
No.
You've got to show you've done it reasonably. Now, what if it isn't sex based on that? Or what if it's because I want a work-life balance, and as a result, I want to work 3 days a week, right? And you just say, or employer says no. Well, in those circumstances, if you can show that it's seriously unreasonable and it results in a fundamental breakdown of trust and confidence because they just haven't dealt with it reasonably for you, well, that might amount to what's called a constructive dismissal claim. Those are worth up to £90,000 approximately, or a year's pay, whichever comes first.
Yeah.
So there's consequences if you don't do the right thing, depending on certain criteria.
And then also what comes in is setting a precedent, and having handled one a certain way and having handled another a different way. Would that cause challenges?
Yeah, I mean, if the difference in treatment is something that is illegal, then yes. So, for example, Meeta, I know you don't smoke, but suppose I treated you less favourably because you smoked than a non-smoker. Well, whilst it will be discrimination, it's not unlawful discrimination. There's no law that protects smokers.
Protected characteristic.
Correct. So what is the reason for the difference? If it's something that's a protected characteristic, well, it's discrimination. If it's something because I don't like you, or something like that, well, then that might amount to a constructive dismissal claim or something, if you've got 2 years service, for example.
And where you're handling flexible working requests and you're thinking, I'm not quite sure, that's the time to reach out to Tosh and I and check with us and ask us, listen, this is where I am. Are we on the right track? Is it going to stand up? Because actually, you're absolutely right, Tosh. It's not just for parent childcare. Actually, now looking after elderly parents is a big issue. We know that there's a social care crisis. People want time off for IVF. Adoption is already in place if somebody has a baby by adoption. I was given puppy leave. I got a puppy 2-3 weeks ago, and I got puppy leave, and I actually have needed a bit of morning and evening flexibility because, you know, having a new baby, it's been overwhelming. But my employer have, you know, because I'm the boss, but I also say I have to lead by example. So I would never do anything that I wouldn't offer any of my people as well. But it's very interesting that actually, you know, a lot of people are now worried about the support they'd get when they're going through fertility treatment. And what's happened with people being on furlough and working from home is that, as you said at the start, Tosh, their personal drivers are singing much louder. And employers do have to hear that. It's really important because the rights of the court cases, the lady that won the 180,000, we talked about the fact that that might not have gone that way pre-COVID, but post-COVID, things have changed. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the obligation to consider these things more carefully is certainly effective. Maybe would have got away in the old days because so many employers were saying you just can't work from home, but now everybody is. Everybody had to make it work, and that's a really important point to make here, isn't it? We're looking at, this might be a problem and that might be a problem. But the way to think about it is people go where they're welcome and they stay where they feel valued. Yeah. So figure out a way to make it work first. Yeah. How can I make this work? And if you're not sure, then do a trial period, a month, 2 months. It doesn't have to be a month is enough. You should normally know whether it's going to work within a time period, right? Yeah. Do put these more parameters in place. Then you can show you've tried. And if it doesn't work, well, then it doesn't work. Yeah. In which case, if the employee won't work the hours that are required because you've shown how it needs to be, not just prefer how it needs to be, well, then that's the end of their employment with you. Yeah. Sometimes you've got to let go.
And we spoke about settlement agreements last time, and I wouldn't mind us covering that a little bit again, because, again, people are going to come back, they're going to be working, and then things are going to start to creep, whether the employer's expectations or the role requirement will have changed. So many organizations have been on a bit of a strategic, elastic band. There was the COVID strategy that is back on track. Some people don't want to do the job they were in. Some people aren't skilled for the job they need to be in. So just be ready. And what I would say to all employers is, do not apologize for the structure you need, but make the reasons why clear and from a business case. So, for example, when we are bringing people into our client world, we now ask them, is this a flexible role? Can this be a remote role? Can it be a shorter week? Can it be shorter days? And sometimes they say, no, this is a ambassador for the business we're getting. So recently there was a client who were moving from serviced offices to their own space. They needed somebody front of house. It was a new role. And they said, this person will need to be 5 days a week in the office. And they explained why. So if you go in explaining that we have a business case and you advertise it, that this is the front of house role and therefore needs to be, personally, someone needs to be present 5 days a week, 9 till 6. Is that, I've said that's okay because they've got a business case for it, Josh. What would you say to that?
Well, I mean, this is the whole point. If they could stand up in front of a judge and explain why, and it isn't just based on feeling, it's based on something you can measure or something you can back up with, well, that's fine. Where did it go wrong with the case that we talked about with the lady that wanted to do flexible working for British Airways? It went wrong because they said it would bring staff morale down.
Yes.
But then the evidence showed that there was nothing to support that feeling. No. And had there been some evidence to support that feeling, that might have been a valid argument. It might have been, but there's nothing to back it up. So remember, the starting point is, how can I make it work? that by taking that approach, rather than, oh gosh, how can we avoid this? How can we make it work? Will help you overcome the challenges, or let you see that they can't be overcome. Asking that kind of question will change the way you're approaching the problem, is what I'm saying.
And that's why this is such an interesting topic. You and I came into this saying, well, not a lot's been said. So, what are we going to actually cover? But this is the looking under the lid of something. So furlough has ended. That's fine. But what does that mean? And that's what we're here to talk about. And our question, our poll today is really interesting. So we've got 20% saying, yes, you're restructuring in the coming months and hiring. 20% are saying, yes, we're restructuring and we're letting people go. 40% of you have said, actually, no, it is good. And then the other 20% are saying that you need to train, coach and reskill. So actually, 2/3 of organizations out there are considering some sort of restructure, reskill, hire, fire. So it really is relevant. And I think there are going to be some unknowns as well, Tosh, of people in organizations over the next few months where there will be turnover. So if we were just going to cover, I mean, we've already been talking for 20 minutes, time always flies in our sessions, but if we were going to talk about redundancy and alternatives, what would you be telling clients to be aware of and be mindful of at the moment?
Okay, you all know these things. I'm sorry, I'm gonna sound like a stuck record again. But the number one thing for redundancy to be aware of is that your employees have to be employed for at least 2 years, right? 2 years means two things. If they haven't got 2 years service, they're not legally entitled to redundancy pay, unless you've got a contract or policy that allows them to have it for some reason. And also, it doesn't allow them to claim for unfair dismissal, which means you can just dismiss them with notice without going through any process whatsoever.
Yeah.
And as long as they're being selected for reasons that are not illegal, like discriminatory or something like that. So that's the first thing. So the people with less than 2 years, you can pick up the phone as nicely as possible and say, "I'm sorry, we're making you redundant." That's the first thing. The ones who have 2 years or more, there's a couple of checkpoints I just want to put into place. All right.
Okay.
So how long should the consultation be? That is dependent on the number of people that are potentially at risk of redundancy. Potentially at risk, not the number that you're making redundant. Okay. So if the answer is up to 20 at risk, then you have but less than 20, then there's no prescribed time period. It's just whatever's reasonable in the circumstances. So you can probably get away with a couple of weeks, right? Normally it's enough time period to do that. If it's 20 to 99, it's 30 days. And if it's more than 99 employees, it's 45 days.
And that is a really important point, because again, these are the things that somebody embarks on redundancy who may not have done it for a while and just think, I just need to get my hands around it again and get clear. So that's really helpful. And also understanding a redundancy is when there is no longer a requirement of that role. It's not, I don't like the person. So pre 2 years, if things aren't working out, you can just say thank you, goodbye, without any legal ramifications. Tosh, is that right?
Yeah, there's three scenarios where there's a redundancy. Either the business closes down its entirety, so everyone loses their job, or there's a downturn in work, so there's less people that's required to do the work that's coming in.
Yeah.
Or there's a restructure for whatever reason, which means we need less people perhaps to do the same amount of work. Normally that might be because of increased efficiencies or something like that, right?
Yeah.
Those are the three scenarios where there's a redundancy.
And in an environment where somebody did one role and was skilled to that role, but now coming out of the pandemic, people become, the organization has shifted strategy and they don't have the skills. If the employer says we'd like to reskill you and the employee says no, is that a case for redundancy?
Yes, the test is there a requirement for that job of a particular kind? The issue then becomes, that's just the definition, right? But that isn't it. There's a process that's involved. So what part of the process means, can the employer find something that is a suitable alternative? So if the employee is saying no to a suitable alternative, they are also losing their right to a redundancy payment because the company have found something that is a suitable alternative. I can't emphasize that word enough, which is why I made a big deal out of it. So suitable means keeping with their skills, qualifications, hours, and so forth. So it's for the employee to explain why they don't deem it to be suitable.
Yeah, and that then comes back to the suitability of whether if the employer offers to reskill and the person says no, where does that fall? Because that I know is happening out there at the moment where people just don't fit into what's required of the role anymore, or there's an element that they have to do more of that they don't love, so the job's changed and it's not singing to them anymore. But the employer wants that person doing that job well,
there's different factors to consider there. Number one is what does the reskidding require? How long is it? Are we talking about a complete new revamping of skills that take a year? Or are we talking about a 4-week training program? So all those sorts of things are things to take into account in terms of whether it's reasonable or not reasonable. And also, again, it needs to be in keeping with their skills and qualifications, right?
Yeah.
Just because there's training them something else isn't the same as a step down. But then employees are going to have to make the choice because the market, as it stands at the moment, do they really want to test it? They've got the security of something. Is something better than nothing? Or is there enough out there at the moment where they can make those choices? Well,
the Tory party message is very strongly about upskilling and increased wages. And what I would say we are speaking to the employer world here, but like equally, there will be people who are employed and who are considering their options is look at how you can reskill to be relevant for the future, because the world is evolving and good organizations will be looking at future-proofing their world. So don't be too quick to think this isn't what I'm used to. If you want to stay relevant, always be upskilling. And actually that's where our training and advisory work is really busy right now, is helping organizations to look at what they've got and how they can bring in the extra tools that they need and the extra skills, because business is changing. The way people do business is changing.
Looking at the poll again, in terms of all the different things people are looking at, yes, we're hiring, redundancy. Well, apart from everything is fine, we can help in all of those categories. That isn't a pitch. Use us. Either use us in this webinar or contact us offline. We've got some real, we're happy to give you some time to just put you in the right direction at the very least. Yeah. So these things are all challenges that can be dealt with. There's nothing to be fearful of. We can help you through it, right?
Yeah. And so going into the alternatives to redundancy, Tosh, tell me settlement agreements and what...
Meeta, before we go to the alternatives, I just wanted to go very quickly what the process was.
Okay.
So a fair redundancy in law, we describe what those are. Those are those three scenarios. A fair process requires meaningful consultation. It's the first checklist. That means a conversation where you're having a grown-up conversation with the employees about what's involved, why they're at risk of redundancy, what the process involved, what they're going to get if they're made redundant, sorts of thing, right? Second thing is a fair and reasonable and objective selection criteria. So you can't just cherry pick. There's got to be something. What is it you're deciding that keeps the best? And what is it that lets that are not the best perhaps go? Maybe that's to do with the level of fees. Maybe it's to do with qualifications. Maybe it's the one that gets the most business in. Maybe it's the one that keeps the most clients happy. Whatever it is that's relevant to the job, you can have a scoring process, and then you measure that scoring against those employees in an objective and fair way. So demonstrate that it's been fair and objective, and that's your selection process.
Yes.
Even though you selected for redundancy, doesn't mean you're redundant yet. You've just been selected. So the next stage is consideration of suitable alternative employment, which we covered, right? Something keeping with skills, qualifications, hours, all that sort of stuff. There might even be something called bumping. Bumping is where you can take somebody else's job, maybe horizontally or something. You could say, look, I could do Meeta's job. Don't make me redundant. I'll do Meeta's job. So then they will put you and me, unless it's obvious that I can't do your job, they'll put you and me in a pool, even though you are never at risk of redundancy. If I score higher than you, because they have determined a fair process to say that I'm the better candidate to stay, then you're made redundant, even though you were never at risk of redundancy in the first place. Yeah. So that's the bumping process.
Yeah.
If you've done all of those things, and redundancy, and this is the phrase, and redundancy is the last reasonable resort, then you make them redundant with their notice pay, holiday pay, and redundancy pay in time.
Yeah. We have such an informed and knowledgeable audience in these webinars. It's great. But I know, even having been in the business of people leading for 25 years, sometimes I need to bounce off somebody else just to make sure I haven't missed something. So that's what Tosh and I are here for, and that's what Tosh does for me all the time. So
and what are the consequences of getting it wrong? And if it's an unfair dismissal, it's up to a year's pay or 90 grand, whichever comes first.
Yeah. So it's important to get it right. And it's important to be prepared that if not now, be mindful that you will get some waves and challenges in the coming months. So I think that's where our third area comes in, which is what to consider when bringing your people back to work. If you have had people on furlough, or the people that are in the organization welcoming people back. Because I tell you what, as hard as people and organizations have tried not to create a them and us, unfortunately, human nature is such that The people who worked look at the people on furlough, and this is what I've heard, and thought, well, you've just had a year off paid, and I've been working my backside off. And the people on furlough come back and think, I don't recognise the space. There are so many different people. I'm nervous. I don't feel valued. I'm off. So I think it's really important for an employer to step back and go through the stages of cultural realignment, strategic upskilling, and informing everyone to get everyone on the same page. That cliche about making sure everyone's on the same page. Make no assumptions. And it happened to us, Tosh, which is why even with all the best laid plans, we had somebody who was on furlough. They came back, but unfortunate. And one of the challenges was that our induction wasn't deep enough. We did it very quick because this person had been with us for years. But because so much had evolved in that time, even though we did a return to work overview, that person didn't feel that they had really got it because they were based at home. We were all still in and out of the office, and
yes.
And so
everyone was firefighting as well, I imagine.
Yeah, and so as much as it was the right thing for both parties, it's disappointing. So I would say that in a time when it's really hard to find good people, and I've never seen it this difficult to attract talent. It is really competitive. Salary expectations are going up. Counter offers are everywhere, and for employers, they're having to reproject their growth and their output because they don't have the people to deliver it. I mean, how sad is that?
Crazy, actually crazy. Yeah. It's flipped around. Employers are feeling disempowered, but they have choices.
Yeah.
They still do have, but we need to adapt. That's the only constant, isn't it? The change.
Yeah.
So, I think we've all been quite, quite skilled in adapting to that, which is why we're still here doing what we're doing, right?
Yeah. And do surveys, do scratch polls, do yes and no little questions. Just get the temperature of the room. People feel that they've been heard and listened to. And if you can't always do what people want, they at least feel they have a voice and they have knowledge and perspective that you'll never see as an employer or the head of a department. So utilize all angles of experience. And I love the one you say about trial something for a month. Nothing has to be set in stone. Try things, keep what works, let go of what doesn't, understand that you're all on that journey together, but making everyone feel part of that journey, advising that there's going to be some confusion, but come and talk to us about it if you're not sure. But then it can go wrong, and I hold my hands up to say that it did for us. And what we've done is we've asserted that when we bring people on remotely, we are going to induct doubly, not the same as we did when people were in the office. Yep.
And before we go into the other things that are alternatives to redundancy, there's a question from Eve. Yeah. Let's go through it.
All right.
So, do you want to read out or shall I?
You go for it.
So in a drawdown, wind down environment, if offered a role to stay, but it is a step down due to a structural business needs changing, are you no longer eligible for redundancy pay if you're not happy with this new role? And redundancy pay, is that 1 year pay plus holiday 25 days and any unused days? Do you want to answer that, Meeta?
No, that's all in your court, Tosh. Please get his glasses on.
So the first part of the question is if offered a role to stay, but it's a step down due to a structural change, are you no longer eligible for redundancy pay if you're not happy with the role? Well, it doesn't sound like it would amount to suitable alternative employment. If it's a step down, it's a reduction in your status or what have you. Doesn't have to be a pay cut, by the way. It could just be a pure status. That is not deemed to be suitable to employment, but it's not open-ended. So if that person stays in that job for at least a 4-week period and doesn't deem it to be unsuitable, well, then it's deemed to be suitable from that point onwards. So they've got 4 weeks to decide that, unless it's agreed by the parties to extend that time period.
Okay, so in basic terms, somebody can say, I don't want this new role that's being offered to me due to the restructure of this business because it's a step down.
Yeah.
Could be title, could be title, could be money, could be content of what the role is.
Yep.
And they can even try it, and 3 weeks and 2 days in, they can say, no, that's not suitable. And then they will be eligible for redundancy pay. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Hope that helps, Steve. That's the first answer.
The second part is and redundancy pays 1 year's pay plus holiday 25 days and any unused days. So redundant. So the entitlement is notice pay, which is 1 week for each complete year of service, up to a maximum of 12 weeks for 12 years or more, right? 12 weeks service for 12 years, 12 weeks notice for 12 years service or more.
So the maximum redundancy pay is 12 weeks, even if someone's worked 20.
So the redundancy payment is based on a formula, which is based on age, length of service, and the age has a multiplier, and a capped weekly pay, which at the moment is 538 quid. So, and it can be up to 20 years service. So that's different to the notice period, okay? Notice period is capped at 3 months unless the contract gives more. 3 months for 12 years or more, right? So the simple way to look at it is go online, Eve, do a redundancy calculator. It'll ask you to put the different bits and pieces in, and it will put it out. But it isn't a year's pay unless your contract gives an enhanced right. So if an employee's been there for 2 years, for example, so they're entitled to redundancy, and let's say they're on 100 grand a year, what is it that they will be entitled to? Well, it's the number of years service, which is 2, multiplied by their age. I'm going to say up to the age of 40, it's a multiplier of 1 over 41 on it. It's 1.5. I don't want to lose you all, okay? So to keep it simple, it's 40. So it's a multiplier times 1. So that's 2 times 1 times how many weeks of pay have they got? Well, it's 2 weeks pay because it's 2 years service. So that's £538 times 1 times 2. The 1 is the multiplier for the age, 2 is the number of years service. So they're going to basically be getting about £1,000.
Yeah. We hope that helps, Eve. And as Tosh said, use the calculator online, but please, do pick up the phone to Tosh or myself if you really want more clarity on that, or you want to work on it. Because as I said, even for myself, having done it, it's not my area of expertise. It is Tosh's area of expertise. And so it's always reassuring, as employers, as people leaders, we need to know that we've dotted the I's, crossed the T's, and authentically been good employers in the process, but represented the organisation. So a lot of things to think about when making decisions. And we're still in quite a sort of unpredictable time due to all the factors, including now the resource shortages out there and people skill shortages. And one thing I would say, and I think for me, not from a legal perspective, but from a smart employer approach perspective, is be analytical. Look at what somebody's job description was, but actually what the job they did was. Then look at the job you want them to do, because even if they're going to continue to do their job description, but their actual job was different and now they'll be doing something different, they will still experience that as a change that they're not happy with. Does that make sense, Tosh?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely.
Always have your business reasons set out. And my advice is go back to basics, really clearly define that, it could be 10 bullet points. It doesn't have to be a detailed, 9 to 6 to do for every day, week, month, and year of that role. But it does outline the objectives of a role and make sure people have the right competencies. All of a sudden, being a self-starter, being able to work autonomously, being self-motivated, being solutions-driven, all of these competencies are important where they might not have been when people worked remotely in the office. And now because people are working in a hybrid or remote environment, these skills are needed. So don't make assumptions. And that's where our training has been coming in helping employers to really identify what's missing and upskilling their people. So again, there are so many solutions. Just think about where the gaps are. We can help you identify those, and then we can help you bring those solutions as well.
One of the things you brought up earlier, Meeta, was about, what should we call it, the battle between those on furlough and those that were not on furlough, or whether there is a lack of appreciation or whether there's a disagreement or what have you. And, I'm going to say the same thing for anybody that's going through a redundancy process or consulting with their employees about getting them back to work on some arrangement, or it could be reduced hours. Those are alternatives to redundancy, right? Reduced hours, different pay as well, whatever flexi arrangements are, is whichever of the processes you're going for, please adopt an approach where there's absolute transparency. Yeah. Because that the ability to mistrust or distrust to get involved in there is massive. And that's when they call people like me, the employees, because they don't believe it. And a lot of times we call the employers, and the employers are just dealing with terrible circumstances, which we've all been dealing with for some time now. And they don't know how to handle it because they're human beings too. Or they're delivering bad news. Not everybody's good at giving bad news well, or talking or speaking about things in the right way. Or maybe they're quite blunt. Maybe you've been there for like 20 years, and then you feel like you're being spoken to in a way that's really, I've given you my heart and soul, and this is the way I'm being treated.
Yeah.
Whereas the way you behave, the way you speak to them, language shapes behavior. I've used that phrase many times within the MTS. So just be conscious. Do it with intent. What you're trying to say. Let them know that you see them. Let them know what you're trying to do, and be open about what where you're trying to get to and what the challenges are. Yeah. Because they will understand it the more open you are with them, right? Intent always trumps technique, is what I'm saying. So let them feel that authenticity, I suppose.
That's brilliant, Tosh. Thank you. And that's coming from an employment lawyer specialist who then says, think about your tone, not just the words. And absolutely spot on. It's, there's no right or wrong. It's just an end of the road, which is unfortunate, but has to be dealt with. So, Tosh, we are already at 40 minutes. And thank you for your feedback that was useful. And you've said, and holiday included. So, Tosh, let's just confirm one more time for Eve and anyone who's watching today. Is holiday included in redundancy pay?
No, so they're two different things.
Okay.
When an employee's been made redundant, they get the redundancy pay according to that formula I was saying you age, multiplier on age, length of service, and weekly wage cap to 538. They get their notice pay on top as well, okay? And they get their holiday entitlements. Now, you mentioned earlier about the 25 days, but it won't be 25 days unless they've accrued the holiday for the whole year, right? And they're making them redundant at the end of that holiday year. Yeah. So it's going to be prorated to whatever period of time that they worked.
Fantastic, Tosh. Thankfully, I can pick up the phone, and anyone here can pick up the phone and ask you that again.
Yeah, definitely.
It can be confusing, but we really hope that everyone who's logged on today to watch our Q&A sessions has found it useful. I'm just ending the poll, so you should be able to see the results there. And in the end, letting people go and redundancy is a third of the room. No, everything is fine is a third of the room. And then the rest is split between, yes, you're restructuring and need to hire. And the other 1/6 is no, you're not restructuring, but you do need to train, coach, and reskill your people. So a complete balance of approaches. And that's what we'd expect, isn't it? Because everyone's story is different.
Yep, absolutely. But as you say, you need help, you know where we are.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, well, we're going to tie this up. We always try and keep it succinct. We know how valuable everyone's time is, but Tosh and I are here every Thursday at 11 o'clock, and next week is no different. So thanks, Tosh. And
thanks very much. See you next week, everybody.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Bye.